in my 19th year as a teacher. I love teaching, and I'm very good at it, which is why it breaks my heart to say that I updated my resume for the first time in 19 years, because I'm not sure I can do this for much longer.
Joining me now is award-winning teacher and activist, Mr. Nicholas Ferroni. Thank you for taking some time with us today.
Thank you so much, Nathan.
You know, just right off the bat, you're pretty suave and you're kind of ripped. You don't teach history, right?
I'm a teacher, history and cultural studies now for 19 years.
Wow.
So, but I love my job. I'm out and train with students. I'm a former athlete, so I have to try to be as imposing of a figure, yet as compassionate as a figure as possible.
Well, it's a pretty big week, the beginning of May, Teacher Appreciation Week. So this is kind of your week. As a high school teacher, are you feeling appreciated right now?
I'll be honest, high school teachers do not get nearly the amount of love that elementary school teachers get when it comes to Teacher Appreciation Week. I do have a few gifts that were given to me already by a few students, but my elementary school teachers are posting on social media of everything that the parents and students are giving them, and it's making me, I'll be a little jealous.
I have one of your quotes, and it is, "As a kid, I wanted to be a superhero. Philosopher, philanthropist, psychologist, activist, actor, comedian, lawyer. So I became a teacher." Wow, that is quite a statement. What did that mean to you back when you said that or wrote that, and what does that mean now?
Well, interestingly enough, I'm a former actor turned teacher. So after Rutgers, I ended up, my cousin was a big agent at Gersh. So she was like, "Let me send you on some castings until you find a teaching job." And she's like, "You're a good looking guy, you'll book something." I ended up booking a few little jobs here and there. I booked a modeling campaign. And from that, I ended up doing some like 10 and under work on all my children. So I was doing that for a little while, and a teaching job opened up my old high school. So now I'm torn between the fact of, do I pursue something that I wouldn't have been good at because I wasn't as passionate about it as you were, somebody who's pursuing it, or do I become a high school teacher? Little did I know that teaching is performing. It's every day. It's the most incredible educators and most passionate and engaging. And I went from putting on one show a day to 6 shows a day to an audience that does not want to be there. And I always feel like, jokingly enough, I feel like every good teacher could transition to acting. I'm not sure if all great actors can transition into teaching.
I don't think I could. That takes quite the skill set. And I have to imagine recently you've also had to play a little bit more of the psychologist role as well, right?
Well, it's interesting. You see a lot of people who are attacking educators online, and they say teachers should just teach. In the perfect world, I would walk in every day and I would just have to worry about teaching history. But we do not live in a perfect world. I live in a world with 153 students with 153 different needs, who come from 153 different backgrounds, who have 153 different home lives. So each student has different needs. Like no good teacher is an equal teacher. I hear people say you should treat everyone equal. No, I tell my students, I'm not going to treat you equally. An equal teacher would tell a student whose father just passed away that, "I don't care if your dad passed away. I need just assignment due today." That's not how life. That's not a compassionate human being. So, as an educator, especially over the last few years, mental health has become so important, not only for my students but for myself. So we practice a lot of stuff to not only help them with their mental health, but make them self-aware, make them understand their emotions better, to teach boys to handle their emotions better, to understand what toxic emotion or aggression is, and to help students navigate the world that we live in, which I'm sure you feel the same way. We've dealt with emotions growing up, but we didn't have to deal with the level of emotion that they have to deal with because of social media. So that adds a whole new level that we weren't equipped to prepare students for or ourselves for. So we are, jokingly aside, that quote sums up educators. We are a microcosm of so many different things. We feed our students. It's like when they don't eat, we feed them. When they need a hug, we hug them. There's a running joke. Whenever I talk to elementary school students, I ask them, how many of you have been called mom by mistake? And every one of their hands go up, even the male teachers, ironically.
Yeah,
But
mom. Have you been called mom?
I mean, I've been called dad, uncle, stuff like that, jokingly aside. But it's
Yeah.
high school students are a little more savvy. Like they may not call me that, but I know they confide to me that I am that mentor figure.
Right.
It's like as a male teacher, we are the minority. I didn't I didn't experience sexism until I became a teacher because now it's like I realize we do not value the work of women.
Interesting. Wow. And going back to that compassion that you were talking about, that all teachers have to have kind of in their skill set. Do it seems like teachers have to have unlimited compassion and unlimited understanding, whereas maybe in certain maybe in certain situations you're not getting that compassion returned to you by students. How difficult is that to navigate if that's something that you experience?
When it comes to young adults, it's easier because I've become very good at not taking things personally. And I think all educators know that. And even as adults, we have to realize that never take things personally. Behavior is a reaction to emotion. It's not a reaction to something that happened. If I'm dating a girl and she has all this hatred towards men, it's not because of what I did, it's because of her past experiences she had. The same thing with children. I when it comes to a kid, there's no such thing as lost cause. I've had students, high school students, who I thought hated my guts. Every single day they walked in, they battled me. They fought me every step of the way. And every single day, I'm like, I'm here for you if you need anything. It's that never giving up hope on people, and then you get them because they need that person. They need to know. Every one of us, whether you're 5 years old or 50 years old, when you're appreciating, somebody cares about you, you open up and you provide more, you do more for that person. And
Right.
teachers, I think, are the epitome of that, where we love on students every single day, whether they know they need it or they deserve it, but we know they need it.
On that point, did you have some teachers growing up that you could look back and call mentor, or that you could say really changed your life or put you on the path that you're on now?
I was very fortunate to have not only great teachers, but great mentors and coaches throughout my entire life, from all races and all backgrounds. And it's interesting because when I started teaching, my kindergarten teacher, who was one of my most influential people in my life, Mrs. Martino, she told me first, she said, if I'm going to tell you anything, it's your students will forget what you teach them, but they will never forget how you made them feel when they were in your presence or in your classroom. And it's so funny because I'm sure you and I can think about all teachers. The teachers we remember, the teachers we either loved or we hated. Those are the kind of the teachers you kind of remember. And for me, I always had amazing, amazing educators, history teachers, and coaches. Mrs. Martino was one of my favorites because I grew up in a Catholic household where my Italian grandmother did not want her grandson to write left-handed, so she would hit me with a wooden spoon whenever I wrote left-handed because in Catholicism, left-handed.
You can't do that anymore. You can't do that anymore, no matter how much you want to.
Yeah, but so it's and when I go into school, and she knew that was happening, but she was just a nurturing person. She read me books on left-handed people. She did things that she did not have to do because she saw that this child who was broken needed this sort of pick me up. And my mom was an amazing person, but it's like your mom has to love you. It's like you need that affirmation from somewhere else. My sophomore history teacher, Ed Wazizak, who was my football coach, he was that salty war veteran who just made me love history because he shared his stories. He probably would get fired today for things he said in classroom. He wasn't afraid to curse, but it's like it always came from a place of love. And it's like I'm still close to him today. Mr. Calguire, my other history teacher, was one of my biggest mentors. Made me just love history and share his experience. But in college, I mean, at Rutgers, Professor Chambers is one of the most influential educators. He was a pacifist who taught war history. And it's funny because everyone who I remember was passionate. And I really think like you when you're passionate, you make other people passionate. And I always feel about anything. Like if you love acting, you can make me passionate about acting because when you talk about it, you just talk about it in a way that inspires other people. And I honestly do not think I'd be good at any other profession because I don't think I'd be as passionate about these topics.
And you had posted recently, I believe it was on LinkedIn. I forget the exact quote, but it was hashtag something about paying teachers more. Would you say then that the lack of pay that teachers have is made up by most part, at least good teachers, made up by that passion? Is that why we have such good
Yeah.
teachers, in America, because of that passion?
Well, that's the double-edged sword I just mentioned before. It was if we appreciated teachers is kind of the hashtag that I got trending
Mm.
was for teacher appreciation. If we really appreciate teachers, this is what we should do. And kind of backtracking to my statement about sexism, whenever you look at any field, which I didn't realize because as a man, I would never even think to look at this, but what you don't realize, or what many people don't realize, or what I didn't realize was any field dominated by women, they make less than their male counterparts. So education is one of those fields that we don't see education, even though everyone agrees it's one of the most important careers and professions in the world, we pay it as if it's a hobby. We're not expected to because you figure a wife's making a second income. Her husband's the breadwinner. So they never planned on somebody supporting a family as an educator, which is why in education, even till today, where men are 26%, but we move on to administration if we want to make money because that's a higher pay increase. Yes, teachers should be millionaires. Elementary school teachers should be paid better than professional athletes because the lives are changing. But at the same time, to go to your point, part of me feels like the more you make the job about money, the less passionate people we have coming into this field. And the one thing I always bring up is just because teachers would work for free doesn't mean we should make them work for free. They always use the students as a rallying cry against us. It's always for the kids. We became teachers for the kids, but doesn't mean you should politicize that or use that as a kind of a dangling carrot about making teachers seem heartless if we go on strike because we want health care, or if the teachers are fighting because we're working second jobs. I mean, most of my teaching career, I've worked 2 or 3 jobs. And teachers are selling plasma, teaching or working extra jobs, are doing all these. Yeah, 60% of all teachers work extra jobs, just to survive, not to live like millionaires. And so the fact that we expect so much from educators and pay them so little, to me, is one of the biggest problems. And my running joke I tell everybody, Nathan, is, if teachers were as lazy and overpaid as politicians say they are, there'd be more politicians who are teachers. That's but it's the truth.
My mom is an IB teacher right outside Atlanta, Georgia, and she is also a very good real estate agent. And that's what she does when she's done teaching. And she is so incredibly passionate about her kids. She loves them and they love her. So I definitely feel that. In 2015, military expenditures accounted for about 54% of our discretionary spending, according to the National Priorities Project. In contrast, education accounts for only about 6% of the budget. That's mind-blowing to me. Do you have any thoughts on that other than what the heck?
Well, because we live in a society that's being profited off of. There's lobbyists. We don't have lobbyists the same way that, Halliburton and all these other companies who weaponize, who monetize off weapons and warfare, who create profit because we go to war. We have these machineries and these armies. If we had the same lobbyists for public education, we would be in the same percentile around there. And the sad reality is, even take it simpler, like in New Jersey, my students are worth $11,000 or $12,000 per student for public school based on property taxes. A prisoner is worth $62,000 to the state. So that is why you have all these private prison companies profiteering and trying to exploit the prison system because they make $62,000 per inmate. My students are only worth $11,000 to the state. So even something like the whole idea of school to prison pipeline, which is a real thing, it's all about profiting. It's all about who's making money off what. Now we're seeing people try to privatize education because there's a big attack on public education now. Part of obviously the attack is all made up, but the group that's pushing the attack wants to privatize education because they want to profit off those taxpayer dollars. They want to siphon money from public schools. So they're convincing people that public school teachers are indoctrinating kids, are perverting kids, are doing all these things that we're not, but just so they can siphon money away from the school and try to get teachers fired when all they're doing is trying to make sure all their students feel safe and secure. Yeah. So if we were even at 10%, the education system in America would change. But we see education as an expense and not an investment. Just going back to your question, so your mom is also a real estate agent as well.
Yes.
So I mean that's one thing that and my one quote is always, a teacher working an extra job should be a choice. It should not be a necessity. But teachers are the only career that have to work other careers so they could continue doing their first career. And it's one of those things that still to me blows my mind, that I work other jobs so I can continue teaching, which is my main job. And there are people who work other jobs, but it's not to maintain working the one job. And I feel like educators are the only profession that do that.
Right. It's to buy paper for the classroom, or pens and pencils and things like that. Right. I want to switch gears just a little bit and ask you a couple questions from my brother-in-law, who's actually a teacher in Clarion County, Pennsylvania. With Corona, things changed, right? The pandemic changed not only the way we get food, our access to food, our entertainment, but it also changed the education system. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Do you feel like with the recent changes in the past 2 years, socially, culturally, that there is a lot of red tape around your students if they're misbehaving? Like if you need to remove somebody from the classroom because they are impeding others' learning process, or misbehaving, or don't care and don't need to be there, need to be in a different kind of learning environment. Do you feel like you are restricted as a teacher when it comes to focusing on those issues?
I think teachers' hands have always been tied on certain issues because we're set up in a system where if we have, for example, if there is a situation where one kid always gets into a fight at school, the school could easily remove that student and send them to an alternate school district or get them the help they need, but they won't because they would have to pay for that. So by law, they have to keep them in the school or pay for them to go to another school. So a school district would then take the risk of that student doing something incredibly harmful to themselves or to somebody else and risk a lawsuit rather than to send that student out. And with the pandemic, we've seen an escalation of students not knowing how to interact or socialize or even to deal with their own aggression, because they went from being in complete control of their environment to a community environment where we're all collectively in the same space. And I think that was the biggest transition I saw for my students, was learning to navigate a world where they're not sitting in their living rooms or sitting in their rooms, and they have to interact with people who are also in their space. But I mean, pre-pandemic or even post-pandemic, we have a system in the education world where we punish students sometimes without providing restorative practices for them, but also our hands are tied when it comes to providing them with the resources that they need. So I will say this, we've seen a lot more focus on social emotional learning. We see a big push in public education on restorative practices, which there should be. If a kid gets into a fight, suspending them for 10 days does nothing unless you try to fix that behavior. If a student has a vaping problem, like at my school, students have vaping problems. If we could punish them and suspend them all the time, but they're going to still come back to school and do it because it's an addiction. Like we have to. This is where the whole idea of martyrdom in schools comes, because there was a recent study done. 80% of parents polled out of 1,000 said it's the teacher's job to be a role model and create self-image for their students, for their child. 80% of parents said it's the teacher's job. We've expected so much from schools now that when schools can't meet them, we think the school's somehow falling short, when all the responsibility now is on the school district. I'm not saying all parents expect schools to raise their kids, but there's a lot of parents who do. And that's the problem, because we're doing things we shouldn't have to feed students. We shouldn't have to provide mental health care. We do because we care. So it's like now the school is not just the school. Like saying a school's a school is, it's like saying your mom's a woman. It's like that's all she is. No, she provides for you. Schools provide so much now. Our budgets are increasing at rates we can't keep up with, and the funding's getting cut. But just to kind of elaborate, we do not only my school, but every school provides so much to create an environment for that child. But the expectations are getting more and more because now it's expected of us, and we're not getting the support we need to maintain it.
Recently, a lot of light has been, you've mentioned this a couple times since we've been talking about it. Recently, at least on social media and in the news, mental health has been a big topic. And it's been uh, brought to light, I think, at least in part due to the pandemic, especially in schools, because now we're even having all of these teledoc appointments that are available to us to our phones. Where, I think I know the answer to this, and I think it probably has to do with funding and money. But where are the therapists? I feel like counselors are not enough in schools. Where is that mental health support system that many students so urgently need?
Well, this is the tough situation we come to now, which you see a lot is sometimes parents disagree with what happens in school. My dad was an old school Italian guy. He was the if you cry, I'll give you something to cry about sort of mentality. If he thought his son was going to need a therapist, or if I saw a counselor, he would have an issue with that because he's like, that's not what men do. So which therefore you're basically saying the school is doing something against my father. My father was not a tough, but he had that old school mentality. So there is a big push now to increase counselors in schools because you know in our school in particular we have one counselor per like 200 students, which there's no physical way for a counselor to get to know 200 students and know their needs in a matter of one school year. But every school now has a child psychologist, has a school therapist. Uh, I mean, Jill Hall in my school, I wish every school had 10 of her. I wish our school had 5 of her. She is one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met. We are so lucky to have her because she's that ear that the students go to. And she's the person who directs them. She has all these strategies that I'm in my 19th year as an educator, and I'm learning new skills and traits all the way on how to deal with student behavior, how to deal with certain situations. And I feel like I'm a child expert because of my experience, but I'm still learning new tricks of the trade to help students navigate this emotional kind of roller coaster that they're going on.
That's amazing. So a lot of it does fall. You spoke on this earlier with your quote, but a lot of it still does fall in the teacher. That therapy, that compassion as well that you need to have in order to be an effective teacher.
Well, it's the whole thing. Like everyone argues, there's no real studies that show that class size relates to academic success. Because one of our biggest pushes for teachers is smaller class sizes. But every study shows that relationships correlate success. But you can't have a relationship when you have 30 kids in a classroom. And there are students. I mean, I don't know what type of class size you were in, but if I wanted to, I could go an entire day without a teacher even acknowledging my existence. Because if I'm quiet, if I sit in the back, if I do my thing, like as an educator, I have classes with 27 kids and I make a conscious effort every day, which is exhausting, to talk to every student. Because then if they're depressed and they're like, no one even knows I exist, that's going to correlate that. And if I had a class of 15 students, I would know the slightest change in behavior from a child. That's why teachers are kind of at the forefront of mental health because we see your child 180 days. We know their behavior. We could tell when it's off. We could see different interactions. But if you're in a classroom with 30 something students, a kid could go an entire school year without a teacher even saying one word to them, and it's not the teacher's fault.
It's not even really the responsibility of the student so much. I'm sure there's a little bit of responsibility, but it's mostly the teacher, the relationship of the teachers with the parents to get the help that that student needs.
Absolutely. And it's my whole thing too, which we point a lot. Politicians like put parents versus teachers as if we don't want the same things for their child when we both want to see their child succeed. And I'll be honest, like I've learned over the years that there's a difference between a negligent parent and an absentee parent. I have single parents who are working 2 jobs who are taking college courses and who can't come to meetings or return my calls because they're working. So I try to go out of my way now. I mean, my connection with parents now is greater now than it's ever been because I want them to know I'm working with them. Like I appreciate what they're doing and I make sure their children appreciate what they're doing. Because a lot of times a teacher will be like, oh, they didn't come to parent like open house or parent teacher conferences. when my first question is, have you tried talking to them? Have you seen if they're working extra jobs? Have you seen if they're going to school? Maybe they're a single parent. Maybe they have 3 kids and maybe they have different meetings. So I mean, it does take a village, and I think that's one of the things that gets lost. It's not teachers versus parents. It's not schools versus homes. To me, it's like the school is kind of the epitome of a community center. Like we're all invested. As I tell parents, as much as you want to see your child succeed, I want to help you and I want to help them succeed.
Switching gears just a little bit. So here on Made It, we like to celebrate people who go through adversity, or who get thrown into the forge, and they need to remake themselves, or have these great battles with obstacles in order to get out alive, or to get out shining like a diamond. Do you have any, you don't have to use any names, specific names, but do you have any specific students or any stories that you can share with us about students that you've helped through adversity?
So one of my first years teaching, I had a student on the football team I was coaching. Great kid, rough around the edges, come from a troubled home. His mom passed away from AIDS. His father would kick him out of the house every other week. We connected through sports. We would work out together. We'd lift, talk, getting to know him. Just always had his guard up. Always did not trust anybody. There was a period of time too where his father kicked him out, and I got a call, and he's like, it's him, and he's like, I'm on the street. I don't know what to do. So there was a week where he slept over on my couch for probably a week because I had to go talk to his father to let him back in the house. Which, as a teacher now, like saying that, I'd be in jail. But at the same time, it's like I'm not going to let a kid sleep on. It was either let him sleep on the street, knowing that I would lose my job for doing the right thing, and that's something I always stood by. We got him back on track. We got him back on the team. We helped develop those relationships. He ended up graduating from high school, doing well. He wanted to go to Rutgers. His grades weren't that good, so I helped him pay his tuition at the community college to help him get in because he didn't have any scholarship money. He went to community college. He ended up graduating Rutgers. It's just after Rutgers, he went into the military. I held his baby for the first time. I'm a godfather to his child. So it's like those stories are all, but it's every teacher. I mean, every teacher has those stories. I was talking to the Virginia Teacher of the Year, Anthony Swan, and his teacher, Miss Wilson, is the reason he became a teacher. She adopted him. When he was homeless, she adopted him and 5 of his classmates because they had no homes. So a teacher adopted 5 students because she wanted them to be with her. And this woman, she doesn't have a monument. She doesn't have a holiday. She doesn't have an award show. Most people have no idea she existed, but it's like, that's a superhero to me. That's somebody who Disney should turn into a movie. And it's like my career pales in comparison to that. But it's like I always have stories of students who I helped, and students I've used my platform to celebrate and empower. But I think your mom will say too, it's like, as educators, nothing makes us happier than seeing our students succeed at anything.
And you're also a massive support system for the LGBTQ community at your school. What have you done there? What are some things that other schools can do in order to support and help those communities?
I have the luxury of teaching in New Jersey, where we're extremely progressive. I have colleagues in Florida right now who are afraid they're going to be losing their job because they have a children's book about 2 moms, or they have a picture with their spouse, their partner, who's of the same sex. And it's interesting because I helped found our school's Gay Straight Alliance, and not because of anything, but for the sheer fact it's the right thing to do. I'm a straight white Christian man who feels like it's my obligation to advocate for women, minority groups, and the LGBT community. And I feel like when you see someone from considered the oppression side doing something, it weighs more with my students. So advocating, it's interesting because for a few years, every year I would always have one student ask about my sexuality. Like, Mr. Ferroni, it's okay, but are you gay? When I would say no, they would be like, well, why are you one of the advisors for the GSA, and why do you care so much? And that would allow me to go into my talking point, because we're here to help each other. We have to support each other. And it allows me to go into those talking points. My advice to educators would be, one thing I say, and not to be harsh, but if your religious views contradict with your role as an educator, you should not be an educator.
Wow.
There's not a single student that should be concerned or not know that they feel safe, seen, and empowered in your room. And the worst thing in the world is a lot of teachers are like, it's not my opinion to talk about. Well, it's Martin Luther King said it best. It's not the words of my enemy, but the silence of my friends, which have the biggest impact. Because you can't support your students silently. You can't support if you're teaching in Texas and you hear this hate going on about Mexican immigrants, and you have Latin American students in your classroom. You can't be silent about that.
Absolutely.
If you're in Florida, we know we have LGBTQ students in our classroom. You cannot be silent about that. But now teachers are afraid of losing their job. But I know educators who are like, I'm not gonna erase my students. I'm not gonna pretend they don't exist. And if I get fired, I get fired. And we should be openly supporting those educators on a regular basis, because politics aside, personal preference aside, every student should walk into a classroom knowing that their teacher appreciates them, respects them, and values them. And I'm afraid that's not happening right now as it should be.
On that note, on Monday night, a draft was written by Justice Samuel Alito, was leaked, calling to overturn Roe v. Wade. What does that say about the current state of affairs in our country, and how is that going to impact our youth?
I did a social experiment a few years back that went viral on gender inequality in Congress. And it went viral because I set up a classroom. To me, experience is the most powerful way to learn. We really don't understand something till we experience it. And I picked 6 boys from the football team, and I picked 18 girls from my feminist club. And I wanted to see how the boys would feel when the majority of girls, 80% of the girls, were voting on policies that affected them directly. And I wrote all the policies to be very anti-boy. The boys flipped out when girls were representing them and girls were making decisions for them. And the video went viral because one of the nicest kid in the world was flipping out, saying it's going to be a male prison, this is sexist, this is unfair, until he finally realized the point of the experiment, that I want to show you what it's like to be a woman in Congress. I want to show you what it's like to be a majority in public, but a minority when it comes to policy making. And something like that only furthers the fact that men should not be dictating policy for women. And it's one of the biggest ironies, because I felt like if men would be flipping out if Congress was 80% women telling men that they have to get vasectomies after having a certain number of children, or God forbid if they say a man has to get castrated after not paying child support. They'd be flipping out like this is somehow some sadistic society, but they're somehow okay with it, and they wrap it up in religious views, which, again, from a history teacher standpoint, religion is not supposed to dictate governmental policy. We know it does, and it's trickled in, but anybody who references religion with government policy, that is one of the biggest the biggest problems that our founding fathers tried to downplay or get rid of, at least. But I have students who, we're going to talk about it tomorrow because it just happened. We had off today. And I have female students who are extremely passionate about this, as everybody should be. It's not it's not a woman's. This should be something everyone's involved in, everyone's concerned about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, to kind of wrap it up, just in the current climate that we're in right now, what is your top piece of advice for students and for teachers moving forward?
For students, it's been a tough few years. If I could give you any advice, it would be to be kind to your classmates, to get involved in every club and activity you can in school. Teachers, thank you. Thank you for doing something for the last 2 years that we weren't trained to do, we weren't resourced to do, we weren't prepared to do, but we somehow did it and made it work. Every single day we step up and we do more than what's expected of us, but we do it because we care. I'm optimistic that the profession is going to change. We are going to have better resources. We're going to be better paid. We'll be set up better, because you can't worry about a student's education without taking care of the people who are educating the students. So to me, it's there's no difference between investing in students and investing in teachers. When you invest in teachers, you are investing in students. So thank you for everything you do. If you ever need anything, please reach out to me. I love supporting and celebrating and helping fellow educators. But just it's appreciated. Society will appreciate it, and things will change for the better. I'm optimistic about that.
I have never been your student, but I can tell that you're an amazing teacher because my mind's been blown. I learned so much in this interview. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. I know that your students must appreciate you. And we want to try to inspire parents and families and students to really just reach out and say thank you to a teacher this week because they need it.
It's never too early to thank a teacher, but it can be too late.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. All right. Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you for joining me on this episode of Made It.